You're listening to the Small Business Talk podcast with Cathy Smith, episode 23.
Small Business Talk is a podcast for business owners and entrepreneurs who want a better way to run their businesses without spending years doing it the hard way. Discover tips and techniques that you can use to take your business to the next level. Enjoy episodes with our guest experts along with deeper dives into tools and tips that you can use in your business. Learn about building your social media channels, how to get Google to love your website, developing a digital marketing strategy, and tools to make your life in business easier, plus much more. Whether you're a small business owner, a seasoned entrepreneur, or just beginning a business journey, Small Business Talk is hosted by Cathy Smith, who has run the same marketing agency for more than 17 years and helped hundreds of business owners achieve their marketing goals.
Today, we are talking to Katrina Alilovic. Welcome, Katrina.
Thank you, Cathy.
Our topic today is how imposter syndrome could be holding you back from your business. That sounds like it's going to be really interesting. So really looking forward to getting into that. I don't have imposter syndrome these days, but certainly have suffered it in the past. So it'd be great to delve right into it. Katrina, would you like to introduce yourself and tell the SBT audience a bit about why you're here and what you're all about?
Thanks, Cathy. Yeah, I'm a counselling psychologist and I have a private practice up in Mount Lawley. But more recently, I've been looking to work with women in business who are struggling with things like imposter syndrome or relational difficulties that they stumble across that are holding them back in business. So I've recently just been doing a webinar on imposter syndrome and looking into it more deeply in a non-counselling way, because I see clients, from time to time who present with issues that are, I guess, related, but think I can see more people or bring the topic to more people rather than in the one-on-one domain.
Perfect. And that then becomes not a location issue as well. So a lot of our audience is all over Australia and in America as well. So you'll be able to help many different people. So that's fantastic. Okay. What is imposter syndrome?
So imposter syndrome is a fancy way of referring to self-doubt. So it's more like self-doubt on steroids. It's a complex web of thoughts, beliefs and behaviours that have the sole outcome of keeping you feeling small, unsure and anxious. It has three aspects. The first one is that you feel like you're phony. You feel like you're not who you present yourself to be, that you really don't have the skills and talents, knowledge, experience in order to be able to achieve a certain outcome. That's number one. The second part is that you have a tendency to attribute your success to external factors. And I think we'll go into that a little bit more deeply. So rather than owning the success as having come from you and your abilities, you put it onto something else. So you got lucky or someone was kind to you, that kind of thing. And the third is that fear of being discovered. So living with that sense of, it's only a matter of time before somebody finds me out.
Absolutely. And you hear of that quite often, of very successful people sort of almost looking over their shoulder going, oh, wow, I've been so lucky and they're going to discover me. I'll just do one more webinar. And of course, when they actually look back, they've got years and years of experience. They've helped hundreds, sometimes thousands of people. But they've still got that little mindset going, who are you to be on this webinar? Who are you to be on this podcast? Who are you to be here? So I think that's very relevant to a lot of people.
Yeah. And, even as you're saying it now, you just think how much unhappiness that causes, how much distress and how much wasted time and talent goes into that.
For sure, because it can stop people sometimes putting their hands up for things that they're more than qualified and more than capable of doing. But if they don't have that specific piece of paper to say, hey, yes, I am that or I can do that, a lot of people will actually hold themselves back and go, oh, no. And then sometimes they'll sit in on those particular, if it's an event or a webinar, and go, wow, I could have actually done that. I could have done this part of it or whichever way.
Yeah.
So, I think sometimes we're our own worst enemies.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do we actually start tackling these problems?
Okay, one of the first steps is really getting clear, as you will have talked to your people a lot about, is getting clear on what it is that you want to achieve. Like, what's your purpose? What's your purpose? What are your values? And that whole thing about knowing yourself. So that's quite a big piece of work in itself. And I'm not going to say that you have to stop everything and go to that piece of work first, but there is a great deal of value in knowing what it is that you're working towards, so that all the things that you put effort into line up with that, rather than getting kind of pulled in lots of different directions where you may be doing new things, putting yourself in situations where you're not skilled and constantly feeling like you're in that learner mode, but that's not necessarily lining you up or getting you any closer to where you want to go. So that's step number one. So just being aware of that. But step number two is really getting inside your own head and looking at the ways that you talk to yourself, the conversations that you're having with yourself. So that's the first one, looking at how the inner critic shows up.
Absolutely. And I think that's so true that sometimes we actually self-sabotage ourselves by going, I can't do it until I've done one more course. So then you go and do another course, and that's going to take you 3 months, 6 months, whatever. Yeah. So you hold yourself back, and then, oh no, I've got to do this. And the other problem, I guess, is this shiny object syndrome is, if I just learn that piece. But like you say, if you've got clarity of where you want to go and what you need to achieve that, then you're far better off sort of holding back from those shiny objects and going, okay, next week I've got to do this. The week after I've got to do that. The previous episode was actually on goals. So we were talking about setting goals for your year and then breaking them down. So without that clarity, you can't do your goals. You don't know where you're going. And yet it's very difficult to step up then if you're not really sure where you're actually wanting to go. Yeah,
and that's one of the ways that you sabotage yourself, straight up. If you're not clear and giving yourself the best chances of getting to where you want to go, you're going to be stuck in those feelings of like, I couldn't do it. I'm not ready, that kind of thing, yeah. So some of the types of self-talk might be useful to go through. So one of the main ones, obvious ones that comes up is, I'm a fraud and I'm going to be found out. I'm good at making out like I'm more competent than I am, and perhaps even like people talk about me behind my back and they'll soon figure it out. So that's how imposter syndrome kind of shows up, that feeling of like, I'm really pulling the wool here. I'm so good at making out like I'm better than I, really am. Diminishing yourself, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And you do see that quite a bit of people, even when they're speaking about their talents, not giving themselves credit for things that they're actually quite accomplished at. But, I'm just a graphic designer. I'm just a web designer. I'm just something. No, you're not. You are that. Yeah.
This feels like a good opportunity to pop in there about imposter syndrome is not humility. You can be someone who, isn't necessarily a big self-promoter or loud about it, but it's really getting clear about how humility, or being humble, if you like, if that's a characteristic of yourself that you value, how that is different to imposter syndrome. And I think we can conflate the two sometimes and just think that the imposter syndrome negative, or the inner critic, is just you being humble, but actually the negative talk that we're referencing has more of an insidious effect, and it's a cumulative effect, and over time it's like cutting your legs off. You're not really have all of you there. Another way that shows up is, when people say, if I can do it, you can do it. It starts from a place of wanting to be encouraging, wanting to be a cheerleader for someone, but in the process you're kind of putting yourself down, or your own achievements down, the effort that you've had to put in to achieve it. Yeah.
That's interesting because you hear that a lot, people saying, if I can do it, you can do it. And you might be talking about some huge achievement compared to something relatively small. And I never thought about looking at it that way, that you've also got to think about the way you're portraying it too.
I love how imposter, the word imposter starts with the 3 letters IMP, imp. And because I think of our mind, at times like an imp, we're having thousands of thoughts in a day and they're not facts. Our thoughts aren't facts. But when we have negative thoughts, because of our tendency to have that negativity bias, we tend to kind of believe them. We don't stand back and scrutinise them. So it's important to kind of sometimes think of your mind as an imp.
Yeah, absolutely, because you do tend to cling on to the negative, don't you? You have a Facebook post, for instance, that goes out and you get 10, 20, 500, however many people agree, like it, make positive comments, and then you get one troll that says something negative, and what do we concentrate on? We concentrate on those 1 or 2 negative things, not the 498 people that actually thought you were doing good work and all the others who didn't even comment. We just really glean to that negative. See, I was right. I couldn't do it. I shouldn't have put it out.
And taking that one as evidence that, we really need to rethink our whole business or professional life. Yeah,
absolutely.
It is good to be able to stand back from that and know that the negativity bias is a thing. We're wired that way because as humans, we're wired to look for threat because it's in neutralizing threat that we keep ourselves safe. So you're not abnormal when you look at that threat. You're trying to neutralize a threat that could get bigger. So we think we can do that by focusing on it. But in fact, focusing on it tends to blow it out of all proportion. And all that energy and all that attention flows towards that when we've got all this other good stuff, over here. So it's reassuring ourselves that isn't helpful to focus on that.
Yeah, that is absolutely so true, isn't it? I mean, our flight and fight has sort of really grown out of proportion now because we're not trying to save ourselves from a bear or making sure that we've got fire to be safe. Now our threats are coming from all these micro little negative thoughts that we're paying far too much attention to.
Yeah. And, some of your listeners may have heard Brené Brown talk about being in the arena and her stating, in which I love, about stating that I don't want to hear feedback from you if you're not showing up and similarly challenging yourself and putting yourself out there. So being really discerning about who you let into your inner circle in terms of who you get feedback from, being really strict about that.
Yeah, I think that's great advice because we can all be keyboard warriors and we can all stand back and say, oh, you should have done that and you should have done this, and 20/20 hindsight's all very fine. But if you're not actually getting out on that Facebook Live or getting up on stage or whatever, exactly what right do you have to be picking apart the person that's actually stepped up and is doing it?
Yeah.
Perfect. So we've got our first one. We've identified what it is, and now we're looking at our negative and our self-talk and our self-sabotage. Where do we go from there? So,
yes, you kind of then move into really curating very carefully the way that you talk to yourself and who you let into your inner circle, and also having a practice of self-compassion. I think we can talk about it in terms of that. So that's a way that you deal with yourself. So we tend to be more critical of ourselves, but when it comes to other people, we tend to be more caring of them. We hold ourselves to some higher standard, but the way that we talk to ourselves internally is a way that we would probably never speak to anyone else. Just yesterday, I heard someone, because they'd made a mistake, they were so cross with themselves and felt so bad that they'd let someone down that I caught them right in that moment. But the way that they were thinking and feeling, talking about themselves was just so awful, and they felt so awful about themselves and how they'd let someone down, that the language that they used was around, I just want to punch myself. I just want to hurt myself. And it's just so awful, really, when you stand back and think about it, because you just wouldn't say that or if you knew someone else was thinking that badly of themselves, that you'd really encourage them not to. So it's really important to be careful about the way that you're speaking to yourself, and to remind yourself that by being gentle or kind or supportive to yourself, it's not a slippery slope. It's not by being harsh with yourself that you achieve. Sometimes we make that association that, I'm only getting where I'm getting and making the achievements because I'm being harsh with myself. And if I was a little bit easier on myself or gentler, I just wouldn't do anything. I wouldn't achieve anything. And that's not true.
Definitely not. And like you say, we are our own worst critics, and there was no way that we would speak to a staff member, a colleague, or anybody else the way we talk to ourselves. We certainly wouldn't be saying to them, oh, you're such an idiot and I want to hit you and all of that kind of thing. And of course, sometimes it's our perception as well. That person felt really bad that they'd let somebody down, whereas the other person thought, oh, well, I really did want it Friday, but Monday's actually okay. As long as you get it sort of first up and don't dilly-dally, then we're all good. So it can be that perception of it being a much bigger problem in our minds than it is in the person that we think we've let down.
Yeah, it's so important to remember that people are generally approaching us with good intent, that they're not there to trip us up or give us a hard time. So you talked about it already in terms of using minimising language, saying trying to really stop using a minimising language, whether that be the word just or take the word luck out of our sentences when trying to explain success and achievements. Just setting yourself a goal so that if you hear yourself about to say the word just, that was just an easy one for me, or, it's no big deal, to really remove that. Try to remove that from your sentence. Or if you find yourself explaining an achievement by, I just got lucky, challenging yourself to use a different way of describing that success or achievement. Another way is to accept compliments. This is a big one, I think, for people in general. It feels a bit embarrassing, or it feels like we're big noting ourselves, to just fully appreciate that someone has liked what we've done for them, or something like that. So just challenging yourself to just say thank you.
Yeah, that's so true too, because when people give you compliments and you almost brush it off, it then makes them feel bad as well. Yeah. So I could say to you, Kat, I think you look really great today. Your hair's beautiful. And you say, oh, no, I haven't done it. And then I sort of think, oh, well, next time I see you, will I give you a compliment? Because it's almost like you're taking that gift away from the person that's trying to give it to you by brushing it off, going, oh, no, I didn't get a chance to do it, or whatever it is. But if you just can really consciously say, oh, thank you, I'm glad you noticed, it makes both of you feel good.
Yeah, I like that, because it really challenges us to focus on the other. Because when you're all caught up in, oh, I couldn't possibly accept a compliment, you're really bringing the focus to yourself in a way that you're hoping is positive, but it is in fact negative.
Yeah, absolutely. You're sort of pulling it back about me, whereas it needs to then be about us as the two people in the conversation, as opposed to one or the other.
Yeah. So the other thing I just want to say there is how comparison is the thief of all joy, and that you might be going along fine and you're feeling really good about something that you've done. You feel on a bit of a high. And then all of a sudden you have a conversation with someone else and they're talking about someone else's new book that's come out, or new client that they've won, or you see something on social media and the wind goes out of your sail. This slippery slope starts around the negative thoughts. So just catching yourself when you're comparing yourself, it doesn't help. And then catching yourself in terms of that slippery slope of the negative thoughts.
Yes, I like the saying that people quite often use about never comparing your beginning to somebody else's middle or end. If they've been doing it for 1 week, 5 weeks, 10 weeks, 6 years, and this is your very first one, then they've had that past experience of making all the goof ups and all of that, especially things like podcasts. I was speaking to a colleague the other day and she said, don't go back and listen to your first couple of podcasts because you'll be horrified at how bad they were. But you've got to have that to start. You've got to start somewhere. So don't compare your beginning to somebody else's end.
When we think about how we compare ourselves to others who are further along, it's a really good opportunity to bring the practice of self-compassion in, because when we see somebody else starting out, we're often admiring of them taking action, and we don't expect them to be any more polished or skilled than they are. And that's some of what we need to focus in on ourselves, is that when we begin, we're taking risks, and as a result, there's a potential for wobbles. That feeling of shame can set in, that you're not as good as, because that comparison stuff starts out. But really to try and hold yourself in the same way that you would someone else, that you're admire you're taking action, and know that the only way that you get to your middle and your end and being more polished, more skilled, is by taking those progressive actions and building on the experiences that you have.
Yeah, that's perfect advice. I was listening to a podcast not that long ago, and they were talking about a child learning to walk. You would never think that they wouldn't be able to walk because they've fallen over a couple of times, and you don't think, oh, well, they're a bit wobbly, so, oh, no, they definitely can't walk, so they better go off and crawl for the rest of their lives. But we tend to use that on ourselves, don't we? Oh, this was a bit wobbly. The podcast wasn't quite as good as I thought it was. So, I can't be a podcaster. I must cancel that and go off and find a new shiny object. But with a child walking, we just pick them up, dust them off and go, you're fine, Kat, let's keep going, off you go. And, we give them that support and encouragement. And then before you know it, they're 18 and they're running away.
Great metaphor, yeah. So we've talked there about really the next two things in the process, which is about getting support. So, whether that be accessing ourselves internally, the support that we can give ourselves, and other people, really spending time, being careful about who we spend time with, and making sure that we're around encouragers. And the thing about taking action.
And I think that's very true as well, that we are the sum of the people that we hang out with. So hang out with positive people and people that may be a little bit further in front of us on their journey, so that we can learn from them and sort of use that as a step up as opposed to that comparison thing.
Yeah, and then next just comes that commitment to review, because when you focus on trying to make changes, you have to build in that you are going to hit a roadblock. There are always going to be those moments where you feel deflated. You feel like, I've been doing all this work, I'm making strides to take action, and then all of a sudden you hit a block. To go back to some of the early things that we talked around about making sure that we don't confuse thoughts with facts, and that if we find ourselves the trail of thoughts coming that, no, this wasn't for me, it was never meant to be, for us to stand back and say, yeah, I know that my mind can be an imp. I need to separate out thoughts and put time into working out what is true and what is that self-sabotage, and then starting again with all those strategies around getting yourself back on track, getting support, taking action. And it's like rinse and repeat. And also making sure that you take time to celebrate your achievements and your progressions along the way.
Yes, I love that. We get so busy, caught up in trying to rush to the goal, that we forget to celebrate those little wins along the way. That, yes, we did start, that, yes, we did book the venue, that, yes, we did actually get some people come. Okay, we mightn't have got the 100 that we wanted, but what about the other 80 that actually turned up? So, yeah, I think it's wonderful that we do remember to celebrate those little wins along the way.
Yeah.
So what kind of things would you suggest people be using? Do you have some favourite tools? Or you mentioned Brené Brown. Would you suggest that they be looking at some positive self-talk on YouTube, or where would you suggest that people be looking to get themselves out of that negative mind, and some tools they could use to support themselves?
If people are already engaged with a coach, or they have a mastermind group that they're part of, or a regular networking group that they're part of, maybe even just to start having conversations and checking out, whether other people, struggle with some of the similar things, and making that part of a conversation and just and I'm pretty sure that what you'll find is that you will just start to see people nodding and, oh, I have that too, that kind of thing. So whatever support networks you already have, maybe just, taking a risk and starting that conversation and making sure that it's on the agenda, and maybe even having a session where people get together and share their, what they do, or, supporting each other.
I think that's so empowering too, to realise that you're not the only one, that there are other people feeling this and that you're not alone. And like you say, sometimes it's just a case of verbalising it and then actually being able to say, hey, Kat, you're actually really good at that. You've done this study or you've done that particular thing. You're really good. Stop beating yourself up about it.
Yeah. And look, there are all sorts of personal tools that people can use. One will be things that people already maybe even do, but I like to use a technique called STOP, and each letter stands for an action, if you like, or a part of the process, a 4-step process. So STOP is the first one. So S stands for stop. So stop what you're doing. You've become aware of that you're not feeling good, and you just need to change things up a bit. So you make a commitment to stop. T is take a moment. So maybe just take a moment to have a few deep breaths. And O is for observe. So observe what's going on. Observe what's going on in your head, your thoughts. Observe what's going on in your body, like reconnect with your body. I think sometimes we get so in our head and rushing to do things. So get back in your body. And ask yourself, for P is proceed. Proceed with one small action that will make a difference to you right now. So what do I need to feel good in this moment? And that might be diverting your attention, going outside in the sun, or calling someone for a buddy who knows that this is a bit of a problem, having a cup of tea, shifting to something, or even going and checking what I call your smile file, which is that little file maybe on your desktop that has got lots of positive feedback. So each time someone said, a positive testimonial or an email that you got from someone saying thank you for that piece of work, you really delivered, when I needed it. So putting all those positives in one place and being able to flick through it and remember, actually, there are so many people that I've helped and done a good job for and that appreciate what I do.
That's a great advice, because I think sometimes it is a case of just stopping so that you can then reset, and then sometimes that's all you need to be able to sort of almost jolt you out of that negative spiral that you're beginning. So, just stop, breathe, and then, work on it from there.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got our stop technique. Is there any other particular tools?
Sometimes we get so used to the constant stream of negative thoughts that we plough on despite them. So we've got this constant noise in our head, but we don't stop to pay attention to what is the thought and working through, is it true? Where's the evidence? That kind of thing. So a technique that can be helpful is to allocate some time where you write down the thoughts that you have with some regularity, the ones that show up quite often, and writing them down, and then being able to go back to each one and say, is that true? Is there any evidence for that? And if not, then crossing, a big black line through it, which is reinforcing to yourself that I'm not going to let that one keep reverberating in my mind, because my mind is precious real estate that shouldn't really, have that intrusion that is taking away from, pulling us back, keeping us small. So it's a simple thing, but it's a physical way of saying there's no room for that thought. It's not true. There's no room for it. And you may have to repeat that over and over again to reinforce to yourself.
The old rinse and repeat. And like you say, sometimes simple tools that just make such a difference. And if you are doing a particular thing, we were talking about just before, and things I've really been working on. And when you start paying attention to that, it's amazing how often you say it. So by writing it down, basically you're conscious of that fact. it can help you to identify patterns that you may not really realise.
Yeah, definitely.
Another one I like is what people think of me is none of my business. I think that's a cool thing because, you don't know where their perception is coming from. And, what they think of or what their external things to that really isn't my business.
Yeah.
So wrapping up, is there anything else that you would like to tell the SBT audience or to give them a G up to basically get out of their own heads and just go out and have a go?
Yeah, to give yourself the best opportunity to have what you want and have it in a timely manner rather than, putting it off to a later date. The thing I really want to underline is when it's troubling you, when you feel it's troubling you and you've kind of remember some of these things that we talked about, but for whatever reason it's not gelling, make sure you get support. So these are two outward focused. Get support. It's in isolation that it kind of breeds and gets bigger, and don't let it. And the second one is, if nothing is feeling like it's working for you, try to focus on being outwardly focused. Try and focus on helping others. So imposter syndrome is, that you're just so focused in on yourself. And if you can begin and to shine that light out onto how am I helping others? What is it that I do that helps them along? You'll just get some good stuff from that because you will immediately see the impact that you've been able to have.
That's great advice. And like you say, sometimes it's a case of just taking the light and refocusing it to make it a better shine, basically. And I like the idea of little molehills become mountains if you feed them. So let's not feed them and let's get that support and move on. Excellent. So I asked all my guests a set of questions at the end. So we're down to the final 5. So are you game for that?
Sure.
All right. So here we go, the final 5. What is the best advice you've been given by a mentor?
Always believe in the good outcomes for yourself.
Fabulous. What is the biggest help that you have received since starting your business?
The biggest help is believing in me. So is knowing that when I share what I want to do with people, that I get back from them, that they're encouraging, of me. So that's kind of, more ethereal kind of, it's not specific, but just I know that when I meet people at networking events and I talk to them and I see their encouragement, it really, really sparks something off in me where I feel like, I'm on the right track. I'll keep going.
Perfect. And that does really tie into our topic about yourself not looking at that imposter syndrome. So excellent. Okay, what is the one thing you have to do every day, your non-negotiable?
It's what I talked about. There's a few things. Some things I don't do every day, but I love my time at the gym and I like to work with my trainer on lifting heavy weights, but I don't do that every day. But one of the things that is an everyday thing is I'm not a meditator or I don't have a practice of mindfulness. I just don't tend to be regular enough, but what I make sure I do is have some time where, dotted through the day, I come back to my breath as a way of reconnecting with me. So there will be times where I start to notice my shoulders going up, and I know that breathing on a regular, deep way will help me get on to the next thing. So I like to think of myself giving myself a minute, and I aim for 10 breaths. So it's like in for 3 and out for 3. And I know then that I've regulated my breathing to 10 breaths in a minute. And that amount is a really good way to bring your nervous system down to calm, because we tend to breathe much more rapidly than that. If you counted how many breaths you took in a minute, typically it's more than that.
Excellent, because I think we actually spend half our lives very shallow breathing, which is not that good for us. So I really like that idea. Okay. What is your favourite business book and why?
Yeah, look, I'm a bit kind of promiscuous with business books. I'm all over the place with them. I love books. I have books everywhere. But if somebody says the words favourite book, that's all I hear. When you said favourite business book, all I hear is favourite book. And my favourite book of all time, which I think is a life book, and I think business is life, so there are lessons in it. It's called The Dance of Intimacy by Harriet Lerner. And it's all about relationships and the dynamics that go on between people. And if we can get that right in terms of how we boundaries and all that stuff, it's not written as a business book, but it's so helpful in terms of relationships.
Excellent. That business is 3/4, if not more, relationships. So like you say, if we can get that right, we're probably a long way down the road to having a successful business. And our very last one, what do you wish you had known when you started out?
When people say just do it, just do it. Because I tend to stop myself. I want to get it more right before I deliver something. So when people say just do it, I tend to dismiss that by thinking, you don't really know what you're saying, like that's not good enough kind of thing. But I actually wish that I'd really heard that and taken it on and just done something a bit sooner. Yeah.
We all think it's not for us. Our business is different. How could you possibly know? And in reality, we're all very much the same. We've just got to make us that tiny bit different. So I love that too. That's perfect. You did mention off air that you had a ebook that you would like to share with everybody.
Yeah, kind of expands on and puts into writing the things that we've talked about today. It's kind of laid out in terms of more clearly what imposter syndrome is, some of the strategies that we talked about. You'll put it in the show notes anyway. It's all there. Yes,
I will. If people would like to know more about your practice and what you're doing, how's the best way to contact you, Kat?
I would suggest that people just go to the Facebook page, Google Katrina Alilovic if you want. There's only one that I know of. Or you can go to Facebook and search for the page called Good Girls New Rules.
Oh, that's perfect. I love that.
Yeah.
Excellent. And we'll pop that in the show notes as well, so that will make it easy for people. So thank you very much once again, Kat.
Thank you, Cathy.
Don't forget to subscribe to Small Business Talk podcast and head on over to smallbusinesstalk.com.au/downloads for all the show notes and links to this episode. Remember, to be great, you must start. Pick one tip from today's episode, take action and implement it. Let's meet again next week at the same time and place. Until then, take action. And SBT community, enjoy your journey.